For your own safety, do not talk to the man on the corner of the street. Do not listen to what he mutters. Do not take what he offers, and whatever you do not make eye contact with him. It all started a long while ago when I left my home to go to work. I locked my door, made my way downstairs and out the building into the dirty air and constant honking of the street I lived on. I had not gone more than a few steps when I saw him, the blind man on the corner. He had been there for as long as I can remember and in the same clothes too. A tattered brown shirt, tattered black pants, a pair of old black sunglasses, and a shawl that may have been white at one time but now was stained beyond recognition. He had nothing of his own except the tattered clothes on his back and a small hat that he always kept in front of him. Nobody paid any attention to him or even dropped a coin into his hat. But that was the strange part. He was not a beggar, at least not in the usual sense of the word. In all the time I had seen him, he had never begged for money or tried to do anything to earn. He just sat there, next to the bus stop, looking down and occasionally rocking back and forth. I wondered a few times why he didn't just sit inside the shade of the bus stop, but the thought disappeared just as fast as it had appeared. He often mumbled and muttered, but only to himself. He was always in the same intersection between the roads of my street and the neighboring one. It didn't matter if it was summer or winter, you could always find him there, even at the most unusual times. He never wore his hat on his head, and he never kept his head up or looked anywhere but down. I was waiting for the bus, lost in my own thoughts, when I noticed him muttering and mumbling away, as was his routine. I called out to him, "Hey, why don't you come and sit in the shade? It's very hot outside, right?" He stopped rocking and mumbling, slowly raised his head and looked at me. When he did, I realized it was the first time that I had seen his face in its entirety. It was unexpected to say the least. Not shocking or scary, but seeing his face gave me an uneasy feeling in my stomach. He slowly removed his glasses, revealing blank eyes that shifted to look at me. And in the second that followed, I felt as if he was staring into my soul, despite the fact that he was blind. Just then, the honk of the bus brought me back to my senses. When I turned back to him, the man was back to looking down, mumbling and rocking back and forth. Given the impatient nature of bus drivers, I didn't have much time to think about what just happened, so I hopped on the bus and started going over my notes for the presentation I had that day. The day went without any problems at the office, another piece of my mind eaten away by parasitic boredom, another set of hours logged in for overtime in hopes of a bonus. It was nearly 1 in the morning by the time I got back to my building, but luckily it was a Friday, so I had stopped on the way to get some food from a late-night restaurant that I frequent. I saw the blind man just sitting there in his usual spot and mumbling away. Despite my overtime, I was in a good mood, so I decided to give him some of the food I had with me. I set the parcel beside him and said, "Here, I brought some food for you." I'd long forgotten what happened in the morning and dismissed it as an overreaction on my side. But when he looked at me, the uneasy feeling in my stomach surfaced once again. Illuminated by the streetlight he was under, his hollowed face looked even stranger than it had in the morning. It looked as if his face was a thin, fleshly mask stretched and sewn over a skull, with tufts of hair wherever faults in the mask had appeared. He did not utter a word, nor did he even consider the food I had placed beside him. He just stared at me without blinking. After what felt like an eternity, he took out a small object wrapped in some wrinkled old paper from the torn pocket of his shirt, scribbled something on it with a stubby pencil he took from his pants, and then held it up to me, as if waiting for me to take it. I took the tiny package from his hands and tried to read what it was under the dullish light of the streetlight. It was simple enough, a few words that I really couldn't make out unless I had proper lighting. When I looked up to ask him what it all meant, he was gone, and the world was quiet. There's silence and then there's dead silence. But this silence was like a corpse that had rotted so thoroughly that only the imprints of where its bones once laid remained. No vehicle horns beeping, no generators humming, No birds chirping, no dogs barking, nothing. Not even the faintest noise from the slightest breeze that was just blowing. I looked around me to see where he had vanished, but I couldn't find him anywhere. In fact, it was as if all life had disappeared with him, and the earth was holding its breath in anticipation of what would happen next. I walked up and down my street to try and find someone, but to no avail. The silence in the air was so loud, I felt like my own voice was being drowned out by it. The same with the streets next to mine. I wanted to call my friend, but my battery dropped from 1 to 0 and switched off just as I had opened the phone. I swore at myself for not having the foresight to charge my phone. Not knowing what else to do, I started walking home, picked up the parcel I left for the old man, and made my way to my apartment and sat at my table to have my sad dinner. Funnily enough, the electricity still worked, so I plugged in my phone and waited. In the meantime, I decided to look at what the blind man handed me. It was much easier to read the note under the table light than the street light outside. It just said, "Open at home." That being done, I started to unwrap the paper from around the object that was packed into it. A small dense cube with some inscriptions on it that looked very, very old. Before I could turn to the unwrapped paper, I pressed a panel built into the rock by accident. I heard a faint click, and I felt a sharp pain in my palm. Blood started flowing from my hand as soon as I pulled the rock away from it, revealing a sharp blade that had pierced into my palm. I tried to stop the bleeding, but I couldn't find anything in reach. My landlord will charge me extra if I stain the table, I thought. I laughed despite the pain, and that helped me a bit. With little choice, I grabbed the semi-dirty paper that the rock was in and mopped up the blood from the table. I thought the paper would fall to bits after absorbing that much blood, but it stayed intact. I washed my hands and wrapped bandages around it before collapsing in my bed, tired from the office hours and my blood loss. The next day I woke up and heard the birds chirping and vehicle horns blaring away as usual. Just a nightmare, I told myself, looking at my uninjured palm and barely recalling the previous night's events through my half-shut eyes. I was walking into my living room when I tripped over something hard. Looking down, I saw the same rock, now a dark maroon color. My heart started beating faster as I reached for it. It was real, and it was covered in my blood. I panicked and checked the table to see if the bloodified paper was still there, and it was, but it wasn't bloodied at all. In fact, it looked as if my blood was absorbed into the paper and condensed into a phrase written on it in a crude cursive. I grabbed it and rushed into the bedroom to get my glasses so I could read. I crossed my fingers and hoped that it was somehow just an elaborate prank being pulled on me by some TV show. I half expected a camera crew to pop up outside my window with a gotcha sign and a check for a ridiculous amount of money to compensate me for my troubles. Reading the paper, it read, "My freedom comes from your imprisonment. I am sorry that my curse is now yours. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Sincerely, a tired old man." The red of the font was almost black from the concentration of my blood. I read it and reread it maybe 15 times. Nothing written on the paper on either side of it. There was no explanation or consolation, only an apology, written in my blood, that seemingly passed on a curse to me. In my confusion and panic, I ran out of my apartment in my pajamas and ran down the stairs without bothering to lock the door. I knew I would find the blind man at the corner like I had every day for the longest time. He had to have answers. He had to. What else could I do? I knew nothing apart from the note about an exchange or transfer of some sort. But I had to find the old man at any cost. I blindly rushed into the street, realizing at the last second that I would probably be run over by a car or bus. And that's when I noticed the silence. Deep and profound. It was like the one I experienced yesterday, but it was more numbing and tranquil than that one. It was like the silence had accepted me as its own. The world was empty like last night, but this time it was more peaceful. I went over to the blind man's spot next to the bus stop to see if he was there. As I approached, I saw the spot was empty. No blind man. No information, no revelation. Even though I knew I wouldn't find him there, I went ahead and looked around his spot. I found a small chunk missing from the ground that looked like it could hold a small cube, like the one in my apartment. So I went back, scavenged through the living room to find it, brought it back, taking care not to stab myself again, and put it in the hole in the ground. Nothing. Once again, I had hit a dead end, but hope was not fully lost. There was something I was putting off to not harm myself, but seemed like a good time as any to try and test it. I carefully removed the cube and put it panel side down, then pushed it down with my hand. I heard the click and once again the blade stabbed through the back of my hand. Winching in pain, I persevered and pressed down again. I heard another faint click and the blade retracted. The blood on the ground near the cube was gone. The side of the cube had popped up, revealing a chit of very old paper inside. Unfolding it revealed a poem written on the inside. I knew it was not the old man's because his handwriting was different in the first paper, and the paper looked much older than the blind man himself. A marked palm to first serve you a reminder. Changed eyes next that see only the Savior. Time binds your life here until you find another. Pass on the mark and fade away. The poem was not written in English or any language I recognized, but I could understand it clearly. I rubbed my eyes in disbelief. What was going on? What did all this mean? Before I could set off home to try and call someone, my hands started burning. Imagine the worst pain you can and multiply it by 1,000. That was the pain I experienced, and I'm not ashamed to say that I passed out from it. When I came to, there was a strange symbol on my palm, a circle made with 2 arrows that looped into one another, the marked palm. I ran back home and tried to burn the paper. Maybe that would set me free. I don't think the old man had the marked palm, but then again I didn't exactly examine him too closely. The paper remained intact and my panic only grew. If the poem was correct, my eyes would change next. I was going to become blind like the man, till I could find someone to free me. For how long? I don't think the blind man himself could tell me that. I don't think he was the first one or even one of the earlier ones to be affected. The irony I could clearly see was that only time could tell me how much time I had to wait. I slept in my bed, awaiting the eventual blindness that never came. Neither sleepy nor blindness. I've had a lot of time to reflect on what happened that day, and I can say a few things for sure. The blindness is not dark. You cannot see the people, and they cannot see you. You can only see the next person to pass on the curse to, and they are the only ones who can see you. What comes after I pass it? I don't know. I don't know if I want to know. It has been a long time since that day. How long? I don't know either. My time passes in a constant state of dusk, so I don't know if it's day or night, much less how much time has passed. I said this was all a few days ago, but could have been a few decades or maybe even a century. In fact, I don't know if humans still exist anymore. I have nothing left in my life except waiting. My clothes have tattered, my bones have weakened. I've not heard my voice in a long time, and still I live. Is it life? I don't know. And so I wait until that inevitable day. All I have left to say is this. For your own safety, do not talk to me. Do not listen to what I mutter. Do not take what I offer. And whatever you do not make eye contact with me. Because sometimes you think you're doing good and then you listen back to it later and you're like, well, these are the worst takes I have ever heard in my life.